This is Renewing Faith Radio with Pastor Jason Gold of Regeneration Calvary Chapel in Sandpoint, Idaho.
In your presence, darkness hides.
We have the opportunity to be a legacy. We have the opportunity to have influence in our families. And let's say that your influence as a child, you didn't have a good influence. Well, guess what? You're responsible for you, and you can change that. A bad legacy does not have to go from generation to generation. And it's sobering to think that the things that, good and bad, our kids will catch on to.
On the cross it was done.
The Herods were a family that we read about quite a bit in the Bible. Unfortunately, they're not the best example for what it looks like to leave a strong family legacy. In today's message, Pastor John will be sharing about that legacy and the responsibility that we have to create it. Even if we came from a less than ideal background, we have the ability to change that. We are the only people responsible for the legacy that we leave behind. God will help us leave a strong one for generations. Now turn in your Bible to the book of Acts chapter 25. As Pastor Jason continues his message, Opportunities in Disguise.
One thing I long for, and I will seek.
He's ignoring the bigger issue, and that is, what is the well-being for Paul, this innocent man? He's wanting to keep the peace with this crowd, which is his job, but he's also asking Paul, hey, will you go to Jerusalem? Because it was illegal. You think, well, why didn't he just take him? Why didn't Festus just take Paul to Jerusalem? It was illegal for the Roman governor to take the accused to a different court if they did not agree to go. So he had to ask Paul, and Paul said no. So that's what's taking place here. And Paul, he understood the Roman government. In fact, in the book of Romans, Paul writes about the Christian's responsibility to submit to government. And depending on what crowd you're in, that's an unpopular thing to say. But we are Christ followers. We're following Christ. And that is our declaration, that his word really trumps anything else. Romans 13:1 says, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. That takes faith right there, to understand that the authorities in place, God knows, and God is doing what he wants to do. They are a tool for him to further his kingdom. Verse 2, it says, therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. This is a tough pill to swallow, especially when government comes against what you think are your rights. Verse 3 says, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this, you also, here's a popular one, pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Just last week I met with our tax consultant, and she's the same person that does our tax auditing here at the church once a month. And she is an expert in tax law for churches, and so it made sense for me to go there to her. But I do have Jewish blood in me, so I love to negotiate. And one of the things I said to her, so I was asking questions. Well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I said, however, I don't want to do anything that is gray. I want to do everything above board. And so just because I'm trying to negotiate doesn't mean I'm asking you to do anything that I want to use the law to my benefit, is what I said to her. And that's exactly what Paul's doing. Paul's using the law to his benefit. He knew the law. He was subject to the law. And here Paul is submitting to the Roman government, but because he understands it, he uses it to his benefit. And so he takes this opportunity to appeal to the Roman court. And he appeals to Caesar. In verse 10, it says, so Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews, I have done no wrong, as you very well know. So he's calling Festus out and saying, why are you wanting to take me down to Jerusalem? I'm appealing to Caesar, and you know I've not done anything wrong. Verse 11, for if I am an offender or have committed anything deserving death, I do not object to dying. This is a man of clear conscience. This is a bold statement. For him to say, if I've done anything deserving of death, so be it. But he goes on to say, but if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, you have appealed to Caesar? To Caesar you shall go. Now, this Caesar that he's appealing to is Caesar Nero. Now, historically, he's not a good guy. But the first 5 years of his tenure, he was a good guy. He had surrounded himself with wise counsel. And so while this was taking place, Paul did not think that it would ever turn, that Caesar Nero would be anti-Christian, that he would come against Christians. So that's what's taking place in this time in history, which really lends to, when you think about Nero and that he had surrounded himself with good counsel, Proverbs 19, verse 20, it says, listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days. There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel that will stand. We need to surround ourselves with the right people. You've heard the saying, I'm sure. You are who you hang out with. You are what you eat, right? And so 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. What's easier to do? Pull someone down a ladder or pull somebody up a ladder? Paul understood what he was doing. He understood that, you know what, I'm appealing to Caesar. Jesus told me that I'm going to be going to Rome. So he's appealing to Caesar. All right, verse 13, it says, and after some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. So Agrippa II is the son of Herod Agrippa I. Herod Agrippa I is the one that killed James. So the Herods, they're not a family. You might refer to them as kind of like the Kardashians or something. But Herod Agrippa II, he ruled of the northeast region of the province for which Festus was responsible for. But Agrippa, he understood, he was an expert with the Jewish customs and the religious matters there. And he would actually be a help to Festus to get an understanding of how the Jews are looking at the Apostle Paul. What are some of the issues? And so he would be of good counsel, but he didn't hold any power in the proceedings for Paul. Bernice, now she was a piece of work. She got married when she was 13. She married her uncle, Herod Calsus. And then when he died, then she became the mistress of her brother, Agrippa II, which is the guy she's with right now. And then she married King Paulman of Cilicia. And then after that, she became the mistress of Emperor Vespasian's son, who was Titus. So she got around. She went through a lot of guys. And actually there in Jerusalem, they had a Bernice support group because of what she did to the guys there. No, she didn't. But needless to say, Herod Agrippa II and Bernice, they're in an incestual relationship, kind of gross, but he still had a lot of influence. Herod Agrippa II, he was responsible for the dealings and the affairs there at the temple. And also he was responsible for appointing the high priest. And so he had influence. He was not over Paul by any means. But there is something to learn here. The Herods, Herod the Great, who was the one that went after all the babies after Jesus was born. It's just a bad legacy with the Herods, which lends to the point that we have the opportunity to be a legacy. We have the opportunity to have influence in our families. And let's say that your influence as a child, you didn't have a good influence. Well, guess what? You're responsible for you, and you can change that. A bad legacy does not have to go from generation to generation. And it's sobering to think that the things that good and bad our kids will catch on to. But I teach my kids, to do such and such. I've taught them well, but how have you lived your life? Things with your children, things are caught more than they are taught. The observation of who you are is more of who they're going to become. And it's important for us to realize that. And we see that happen with the Herod family. And so we need to really take our legacy serious. Now, moving on to verse 14. It says, when they had been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king. So he's bringing it to Agrippa II. There is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix. So he's explaining to Agrippa what Felix had done about Paul. He just left him there for Festus to deal with. Verse 15, it says, about whom the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem asking for a judgment against him. To them I answered, it is not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face. So Festus is adhering to the Roman law and has opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him. So Festus is new to the area. He's explaining to Agrippa why he hasn't taken Paul to Jerusalem and that it is Paul's right to face his accusers. Verse 17 says, therefore, when they had come together without any delay the next day, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought in, referring to Paul. When the accusers stood, they brought no accusation against him of such things I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion, key word, and about a certain Jesus. That's interesting. He's not saying about Jesus. He's saying a certain Jesus. So Jesus is a popular name. And now he's saying that he's talking about this certain Jesus that died and then that he rose again, who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. So Festus, this is like new information for him. So you could just imagine, wait, he's talking about this certain Jesus that has died and he's still alive. And these people are coming against Paul regarding their religious beliefs. Now in the King James, it uses the word superstitions. The actual Greek word here is a really interesting word. It's demonia, and the primary meaning of it is the fear of the gods. So their superstitions, their fear of the gods. So in verse 19, had some questions against him regarding their own fear of the gods, their superstitions. One of the root words in the Domina is dido, which means to fear, and then daemon, which means a pagan deity. And that word daemon is where we get our English word demon. So it's really interesting when you break apart the word, you blow it up, and then now we see, wow, these guys are not talking about religious things. They're talking about pagan. Like Festus is looking at, like, they got their rituals, their pagan gods that they're concerned about. And so when you think about this language, you think about what's being used, and Paul is being accused. He's being falsely accused. Paul hasn't done anything wrong. So these people are being used by Satan to come against Paul. Satan, no doubt, would want to shut Paul's mouth. Where Paul at one point was a tool for Satan, then all of a sudden became Satan's enemy. Paul at one point, or Saul, his name was Saul, was a persecutor of the Christian church. And then he had his road to Damascus experience, and he believed upon Jesus Christ, and then he just became a proclaimer of the gospel. And he was just a relentless communicator of what Jesus did. And so continually these false accusations are coming against Paul. And we know really who the accuser is. Revelation 12:10 says, "Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, 'Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down.'" Who is cast out of heaven? Satan. Who's going to be cast into the lake of fire? Satan. Satan is the accuser of the brethren. And so Paul, he's wanting to get to the real issues here about Jesus Christ and the claims of who Jesus is, that Jesus had died and that he had come back to life. And Festus, he didn't seem how this was just all kind of new for him. You think about it. Festus, he's of the Roman Empire, sent down to be governor of this region, and he's never heard about Jesus, this certain Jesus. He's kind of talking to Agrippa, kind of like, hey, this is new news to me. Listen to what Spurgeon said. And it's in regards to this account here. It says, "The masses of this city are as ignorant of Jesus as Festus was. You can never have a congregation in any of our places of worship and feel sure that they all know Jesus. If you gather in the outsiders from the street, you may be sure that the story of Jesus will be news to them. We call this a Christian country, but it would be very difficult to prove that it was so." Very profound. We always need to be aware of the message that we're telling, and we're always to be ready to give that message. Just like Paul was in prison, ready to share the message of Jesus. Now, verse 20, it says, "And because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem." So Festus is continuing his monologue, really. He's explaining to Agrippa what's taking place. "I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus." Now you think, well, I thought he appealed to Caesar. Augustus was a title. It's a title of reverence. So Augustus Caesar Nero, the Reverend Caesar Nero. And so he goes on to say, "I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar." So people might say, well, that's a contradiction. No, if you understand the Greek and dig into it a little bit, then you have a better understanding of it. Verse 22, it says, Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. So Agrippa's curiosity of Paul's story, he's like, hey, I want to hear what's going on. And so we're going to see here that Paul is brought before Agrippa. And verse 23, it says, So the next day when Agrippa and Bernice had come with great prompt, that word prompt is like showmanship, that of a facade, where it's everything masquerade. It's for display. From the Greek word of pomp is where we get our word fantasy, interestingly. So, on Halloween, kids will dress up in a fantasy costume. They want to try to be something that they're really not. And that's what this is taking place, is that they're entering in with this great masquerade. And it says, and had entered the auditorium, which is a large crowd, with the commanders. The commanders, that word is tribunes, which the tribunes they brought 100 men with them. So it says commanders, which means it's plural. So it's multiples of thousands. And the prominent men of the city at Festus' command Paul was brought in. So this was a large crowd ready to hear Paul. And many would look upon this as a crisis in their own life. You'd look at this like, man, all these people are coming in. They want to hear all the accusations that are against me. And so this is a bit of a crisis. But Paul sees this as an opportunity. Because Paul, he's a prisoner. And yet now he has this crowd. He has this crowd that is, obviously the accusations are going to come against him, but he's going to get his turn. And so we don't see Paul complaining here. We see Paul using this opportunity. And we need to do the same. We need to see the difficulties in our lives as opportunities, our present circumstances as things that God wants to use in our lives. We need to look at every situation as, Lord, is there a way that I could serve you in this, that you would get the glory? And so we need to realize that our difficulties are actually opportunities in disguise. And we need to be able to see God through it. Now, verse 24, it says, And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all the men who are here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. Would your feelings be hurt if someone said that? You are not fit to live any longer. You just be like, that's mean. Well, that's what's being said. Have you ever had anybody say that to you? You are not fit to live. Let that sink in. But when I found, verse 25, that he had committed nothing deserving of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. So it's interesting, as Luke is the author of Acts, is including this to clearly communicate that Festus saw no fault in Paul. I'm going to send him. I'm going to send him to Caesar.
Today's teaching in the book of Acts is just one of many that Pastor Jason has taught here on Renewing Faith Radio. Did you realize that the book of Acts is written by a man named Luke? He also wrote the Gospel book of Luke. It's interesting hearing these events from the perspective of a doctor named Luke, who traveled with Paul to many places. As we're working our way through this book, surely there are some things that have related to you specifically. Have you been unjustly treated for your faith? Perhaps you've been on the other side and know what it's like to look down on those who claim Jesus as their Savior. No matter what you've experienced, this book of Acts gives you hope strength, and courage to press on. We encourage you to continue listening to these messages in Acts, as they serve as a constant reminder that God's with you through the trials, and He's there on the mountaintop experiences too. Just as God was with these disciples in forming the early church, He's with you today. If you're interested in hearing more messages like this one, come join us at Regeneration Calvary Chapel in Sandpoint, Idaho. Renewing Faith Radio is an outpouring of the ministry happening at Regeneration Calvary Chapel. If you want more information about our services or our location, head over to renewingfaithradio.com and click on the church link. Pastor Jason will continue on in the book of Acts next time, giving you a greater glimpse of God's miracles and helping you see that He's working. Be sure to join us again here on Renewing Faith Radio.